Welcome to this stop motion tutorial. Today we will be learning about two aspects of stop motion. These are medium and method. Before we go further with these terms, let's pose the question. What is a stop motion? Well, stop motion is a moving picture created by using a collection of stills that capture the motion of objects. You may ask, how is this different than film? Isn't film just a bunch of pictures taken in sequence and then played back? Well, yes, but there are certain factors that further define a stop motion. The objects are unique in that they would not move on their own without human manipulation, as opposed to an actor acting out their scene. Furthermore, stop motions use drastically less frames per second than movies that give it that unique flow of, well, stops. We will continue with exploring those two terms we brought up earlier, medium and method. The medium of a stop motion simply relates to the characters, objects, and even the set and what they are represented by in the stop motion. The simplest of these is a hand-drawn flipbook, where each still or frame is hand-drawn and is slightly different than the previous one, so that when they are compiled into a book like this one, you can flip through it and you get the illusion of movement. Coincidentally, this simple variation of stop motion also represents a method of stop motion. The method describes the way in which the stills are captured and compiled to create the stop motion. In the case of the flipbook, each still is hand-drawn, then they are all compiled in the book, which you can flip through to enjoy. So what other methods are there to produce stop motions? Well, most of them are very similar, although they do vary a bit. Drawings by hand is not everybody's strong suit and can also take a lot of time. That's why cameras were invented. Cameras are a great way of capturing stills when one needs to compile a stop motion. Any camera will work. It really comes down to availability, budget, and preference. Two good options would be either a DSLR camera like this one, or just your phone. Regardless of what camera you end up using, it is almost essential that you mount it on a tripod. This is because to have a pleasing stop motion, it is critical that the set or background stays constant. Another useful tool to eliminate micro movements of the camera, and thus the scene itself, is a shutter remote. This is one for a DSLR, or you can use a small one like this that you can pair with your phone through Bluetooth. This will allow you to take shots without touching the camera or the phone itself. Once you've taken your photos, you'll need to upload them onto a computer and convert them to a video or slideshow format. If you do decide to end up using your phone, there are applications that you can download to use directly on your phone that have features which will in turn make it easier to shoot your stop motion. One of these is a pretty easy to use application. It's called Stop Motion Studio. The main advantage to applications such as this one is that they have extra features, specifically one that lets you overlay your previous shot so you can accurately make micro adjustments to your characters, objects, and set so that the motion seems smooth and even. If you want more information on how to use Stop Motion Studio, I would recommend this nice tutorial by my colleague Joshua that gives you a nice overview of all the features included. So now that we know a bit more about the method of producing a stop motion, let's go back to the medium. If you remember, we talked about the basic medium of hand-drawn pictures, such as the flipbook. This would take a lot of time, and it also requires some skills at drawing. So what other options are there out there? Well, there are two widely used mediums when it comes to stop motion. These are clay and Lego. While with clay, there's the versatility and freedom to create some pretty neat stuff. However, once again, like the flipbook method, it does require artistic ability in sculpting and modeling. The other method widely used is the Lego stop motion. While one is limited to the characters and blocks made by Lego, there's actually quite a large variety of these. So it doesn't take much to be able to make some pretty cool stop motions. I'm not one who's great with drawing or modeling, so I prefer Lego. When doing a Lego stop motion, it's often easier if you can get one of these Lego boards. These will allow you to fix your parts onto it I would also recommend securing it down with some two-way tape, which I've done here on the underside. I would suggest taking your Lego figure and playing around a bit to see how it is, moving it around for your micro movements. As you can see, it takes a bit of practice because especially when you're creating like walking motion, you have to sort of release it off of the board a bit as you have it walk across. And you want to make sure that it still stays relatively close. Again, if you're using that app that allows you to see the previous shot, you can always make micro adjustments to get him closer to where he was before and make it look like a nice smooth motion. Once you've figured out your micro movements and have a better feel for how the Lego moves, you can start doing your final production. I would suggest at this point to do a quick storyboard and possibly a script if required, so that you know what you're planning to do. A little planning ahead of time will save a lot of time in the long run. Remember, you don't have to stick to your storyboard. If you come up with some changes that you want to make, you can just make them. Now, let's take a look at a short stop motion to get some ideas of what not to do. This is a short stop motion that I made as I was preparing for my final project. The main intent here was to get an idea of how my pieces moved and how many frames per second I would use in my final production. So let's take a look at this stop motion to see what kind of items we'd like to avoid when creating our stop motion. We'll give it a play just to watch and see what the video is about. As you can see, we have this little guy who's raising his hand, waves at the audience, walks over and pats this pink-eyed block, which obviously seems to like that. Then he carries on to the other corner where he turns around and plants a little flower that grows up and blooms into a very bushy flower. Before we take another look at this, if we look at the scene in general, there's a lot of chaos going on in the background. There's cups and Lego bits and pencils and a mouse and a USB. Now this may be the intent of the video. It could be that the Lego man is in a human world just walking through it. But in this case, it was my messy desk. So you want to be sure that when you set up your shot, anything that you don't want visible in it isn't in it. The other thing that you'll see is that these extra items on the sets do end up moving around as I'm doing the stop motion. And this is just because I was bumping them or grabbing little different eyepieces. So you want to be careful that you don't end up touching things that shouldn't be moving around on their own in your production. If we also take a look, this time watching this little white board that I have taped down, if you recall, I suggested that one has a Lego board like this so that you can set your pieces on it nice and easily and fix it down. However, you can see that the tape job isn't that great and the board ends up moving around a bit anyway as I make the moves. So if I were doing this in a final production, I would probably tape it down with some double-sided tape. So if we give it another run here, another item that you want to keep an eye out for is that you don't end up taking any shots where your hand is actually in the frame, which you'll see coming up here right towards the end of the film, that I had one shot that my hand was in there and it ends up disrupting the flow. So finally, I'd like to point out another thing as you watch this video. The entire screen is nice and still, but then as we come here to about the 19-second mark, you'll notice that the frame shifts, and that's because at this point in the video I was actually bumping the tripod. And I say video, but I guess in this point of taking pictures I had bumped the tripod and actually switched position. And it's really hard, even if you're using an app that shows you your previous shot, to put it back in the exact same position, and you'll end up having your frame be different from that point on. So these are a few things that you want to watch out for when you are doing your final production. I would highly recommend doing a few practice shots to get a feel for how the Lego characters move around, and also to prepare you for when you're actually doing your final shot, so you don't do any of these small mistakes that I did, where you have little pieces moving around, the board moving around, accidentally bumping into the tripod, and of course keeping your hands out of your frames in your final production.
Summer fires are going out. We're fleeing to the south. I crave the neck beneath your head. Oh, that mouth. We trace the path to safety. Tread your love to fear. Treat me like the ever after. I'm scared of me.